All right, just started the recording. Welcome to topic 2 study group. I first want to point you all to some new things that I've added to our homeroom. So first of all, to talk about what we're doing today. Today, I added this yesterday and I did talk about it a little bit, but today we're going to talk about how to use the study group repo. Basically, any notebook, or in the future, there will be some study groups where I'm going over more of like slideshows. Because it's going to be more conceptual information for some of the study groups. All that material will be updated in this study group repo. And part of today's session, I'll talk about how we can work with Git to get updates continually onto your machine from this repo. So the hyperlink to that is on our homeroom. Something else that I've added is this resources Google Drive. I actually just reorganized all of it today. So for future phases, there are going to be more things, but this is a Google Drive folder that I share with all of my cohorts. So you can see here in phase 1, there's a couple things that we're going to be talking about over the coming weeks. For example, today, I'm actually going to go over this Google slide deck. I'm going to use this with like visuals to explain Git and how, oh no, I'm offline. Hello?
Hi.
Okay, sorry about that. My internet just cut off, but we are back. Okay. Sorry about that, everybody. What was I talking about? Hopefully y'all heard that this is a Google Drive that I'm sharing amongst all my cohorts. Okay, I just want to check that the recording is still going. Okay, good. All right. So this is a Google Drive I'm sharing with all my cohorts, and I'll be going through all of this at some point. But just for today, this slide deck that I'm actually going through belongs here. So the diagrams about Git that I'm going to be talking about live in this Google folder. And in the future, all of our other material, sometimes I create my own documents and slides. They will live here. And just so you know, I share this with all my cohorts, so some material is already there that we haven't seen yet. So when we get to things that are relevant, I'll point them out. Cool. And in addition to that, I've also added an external resources section at the bottom. That has been there, but no worries if you haven't seen it yet. The main things I wanted to point out is in miscellaneous, there is a website called Towards Data Science. If you enjoy just like reading and staying up to date with what's going on, Towards Data Science is a publication on Medium that just publishes articles written by pretty much anybody about data science. So if you just want to start absorbing lingo or, just seeing what's going on in the data science world from all sorts of different perspectives, I do recommend signing up for their mailing list. They send you like a daily little reading list. I don't often go through all of it, but it's a good one to at least subscribe to, I think. So that's a nice blog to follow if you're interested in like just reading about what's going on in the industry. And also I wanted to point you all to this spreadsheet of other instructors' recordings. So I understand every instructor actually teaches the material slightly differently. The content is the same, but I totally understand there are different learning styles. And so on this spreadsheet, there's a collection of a lot of past recordings of these study groups. So if anyone is interested in just like exploring other resources, or if you're just like maybe curious to see how a different instructor presents the same material, feel free to look here. I will not be offended. So just to let y'all know that is down here at the bottom of your homeroom. Cool. Also within phase 1 resources, of course, these will be updated as and when. We have a couple coding practice sites. I would say Coding Bat is really for like, if you're really unfamiliar with Python, there are a couple like Python questions that they have you like write a function that does this. And then they will, give you test cases to see if you wrote the function correctly or not. HackerRank is another really great one. Let me see if I'm already signed in. HackerRank is great. I used this when I was just practicing my Python skills. Again, very similar. They have a bunch of questions. You can see there's like easy, medium, hard. it goes pretty, what's the word? It kind of like there's a progression of the problems. So it goes from like easy to get harder and harder. If you just want to practice like your coding problem solving skills, this is a really great resource. I like this site in particular because HackerRank is actually a platform that a lot of companies use to conduct technical interviews. So if you've worked with a lot of HackerRank problems, I've actually gotten a few interviews where they have me log on to HackerRank through like their own special link, and it's like 4 or 5 HackerRank problems to solve as their interview. So if you've just seen a lot of their problems, chances are you would have come across like a problem before, if you're given like, yeah, if they're conducting their interview through HackerRank. I like HackerRank a lot as well because they not only have Python, there's a lot on this page here, but there's Python and there's also SQL. So next week, we're actually going to be talking a little bit about SQL. And we only have 2 days on SQL, but SQL is quite important. I'll go into more of why that is next week when we get there. But there's a lot of SQL practice questions on HackerRank as well. So I do think it's a good resource. It's completely free. Every question also has like a little discussion forum to see how people think about solving the problem. So I do think is a really great resource. Other than that, next week we're also getting into pandas. For those of you who are getting a head start, this is a great practice repository, not affiliated with Flatiron School, but I do think is a really nice one to just work through if you just want more practice problems, because I know our labs, pretty much every lab is going over like one thing. You don't have a lot of opportunity for repetition. So there are a lot of practice problems here. What you can do is you can actually just clone down this repository. They have solutions. Some of them have video solutions as well. So I like this resource a lot. A lot of students have enjoyed this resource too. So yeah, I know that the curriculum itself can be quite heavy for some, but if you're looking for additional practice, that's here. And as we get to more and more other things, I'll continually be adding resources down here. All right. Any questions before we start talking about Git? Cool. All right. So with Git, the way I'm going to talk about Git is through 2 processes. I have this on the side here, and it's going to be a lot of me like moving the Zoom window around, so excuse that. But I'm going to be talking about 2 processes. One, working with curriculum labs and explaining Git through that process, as well as working with study group notes. Study group notes being this repository that I have here that you all will be continually pulling down from. So to start, let's talk about working with curriculum labs and what's really going on when you're doing the steps of like, Git cloning, forking, so on and so forth. All right, so to get into it, let's ignore that diagram for now. This is just an example of a lab. For those of you who don't know, there are 2 ways that you can work with labs. One, let me just refresh this real quick. Okay. One is you can work on it on Illumidesk. And Illumidesk is basically a cloud server that saves your work on the cloud. So you can work on your labs this way. Sometimes it's easier to do this, especially when it's like not a very heavy lab. Some downsides, this every few hours does trip up. And if you leave this tab open and you're not doing anything on it, sometimes it just automatically shuts down and you may or may not lose some work. So up to you whether you want to do it. I think that this is a great tool to use, especially for like the shorter labs. So if you work on here, your work will save. That's all good. Sometimes there are bigger labs that you might want to save on your computer, and that's the process I'm going to talk about today. So to work on a lab on your computer, I think one of the lessons in like topic 1 talked about it as well. But if you click on this little OctoCat button, it takes you to the GitHub version of the lab, which is where the lab comes from. What you want to do is you want to fork the lab. Basically, forking the lab makes it your own version. So any changes you make won't affect curriculum's version. It won't affect the version that other students see. Also, on top of that, you don't have permission to edit curriculum anyways. So once this is your own version, and one way you can always check if this is your own version or not is it would always have your username at the top. And to work on the lab locally, you're going to click this download code button, copy this URL, do make sure that it's the HTTPS URL. The other ones are like, they're sort of more like higher security links, but we won't worry about that now. But you copy this, you go into your terminal, and this is my terminal. And let me just zoom in so it's clearer. You go into terminal, you choose where you want to save this. And I actually have a DS for data science folder somewhere. And let's see, within this, I also have a labs folder. Of course, you might want to make subfolders for like different topics. You might want to make subfolders for different phases. I don't work on labs, so I don't need that. But I have this labs folder here. What I'm going to do is first make sure I don't have, okay, just make sure that I don't have a duplicate of this. But you'll do git clone, paste that URL, and that lab is copied down. Cool. So next, you can either choose to CD into that lab. CD stands for change directory, by the way. Choose to CD into that lab. Oops, did I not? You see, working with JSON schemas. Let's see, lab, that's the one. Okay. So once I'm in here, you'll see that when you do ls, which I think stands for list all, I'm not sure, but the lab lives in the index.ipynb. So let's open up our Jupyter notebook. And when I open up my Jupyter notebook, I can work on my lab locally on my local machine. So my computer always takes a while to spin this up. But here you can see I will work on this lab. Awesome. So now that this is here, you'll probably work on the lab. And what I'm going to do, I'm just going to put some like placeholder code. Maybe I'm defining a function that does something. Don't care about what that does now, but just have this to have that there. Let's say you finish working on the lab. One very good thing to do, especially if you plan on coming back to your lab or if you plan on, working on multiple computers. I think someone brought that up yesterday. If you're working on a lab halfway and you want to work on a different computer to finish it out, what you should make sure that you do is first, always make sure you save it. Close out this notebook. I always like to make sure that I shut this down first. It's not always necessary, but I don't know. I have mild OCD as well, so I like to do that. Shut down the notebook. To quit out of this Jupyter notebook, click Control-C, shut down the server. Once that is shut down, you want to push your changes up to GitHub. And I'll show you what that helps with later on. But to do that, you're going to do the 3 steps that we're going to be doing over and over again: add, commit, and push. So add always stages all of your changes. By staging, what that means is going to be like, all right, it just sort of tells Git that you have changes to be made. So git add space period. Whenever you see space period, that just means all. You can also do git add -a, I think is also everything. If you only want to stage changes from a particular file, like in this case, we only changed the index file. If you want to do that, you can do git add index.ipynb. So stage these changes. After you stage a change and you know that you definitely want to, go with these changes, you always got to do a commit step. So git commit space -m. -m means message. And when you commit, you always have to have some sort of commit message. The commit message is basically what shows up here. And it helps in version control just so that, with each save, what are the changes that you're making. I have been called out for having really bad commit messages. Like I once was really frustrated working on something. I just jumbled random letters, and I actually was called out during a job interview for what are these commit messages? So be careful. Good to form a habit of good commit messages. So here, let's just say I finished work on lab. Cool. Then you can see that they changed the one file. And then after that, when you're satisfied, you do a git push. Changing something on GitHub is always this 3-step process. So when this is done, what's pretty neat is if I refresh this, you'll see that the commit message for the index.ipynb, again, on my version, has finished work on lab. And if I actually click into this file, hopefully this loads up because sometimes it doesn't. What I want to show you all is you'll see that random function that I had defined. All right, let's try this one more time. If not, we'll give up. But basically, the changes have been pushed up here. If you want to work on a different computer, all you have to do is just git clone this lab on your other computer, and that'll be done. Okay, if this doesn't load, I can show you all the raw form. So the raw format of a Jupyter Notebook is actually a JSON file, which is what we'll be talking about tomorrow. But let's see, where did I put that define function here? So the function that does something is in this file. So we can see that the notebook has been changed on GitHub. I do think it's good practice to always remember to do that. It's just a way of saving your work, especially when you're working on your projects. I actually had a student in one of my courses graduating, lost like 4 weeks worth of work on a project because his computer decided to give up and he didn't save anything to GitHub. I was like, well, lesson learned, but yeah, it's very hard when you lose a lot of progress like that. So always save your work to Git by doing the add commit push. If you have errors pushing your stuff, a couple things to make sure of. Make sure that you have cloned the right version. And if you haven't, I'll show you all really quickly after I summarize what we've done. I'll show you all how you can fix that. Okay, so what have we done in this process? Any lab here starts by just being owned by Flatiron, right? So we have this learn.code, learn-code-curriculum version. This is our curriculum owned by Flatiron. What we did was we forked it over, basically created a copy that was just our version. And so when we did that, let's just go back to our fork here. This is now our version. And we git cloned it so that we could work on it on our local machine. And then any changes that we made down here, we did the add commit push to push it back up to this version again. So, oops, let's go back. Several things to remember. Let me just make this a little bit bigger. A couple of things that are good to remember. Git status is a very, very helpful prompt command. So if I do git status, here you can see that everything is up to date. Your working tree is clean. If I really quickly make a change, let's pull up Jupyter Notebook and make a really quick change. If I were to change something on my, let's say index.ipynb, let's just say instead of none, let's do something like really trivial, like return none. That's actually going to register as a change as well. Save that, close it out. All right. When we pull our terminal back up again, and let's close our notebook. All right. When we do git status, it says that it's modified this file. So if you forget what changes you've made, if you forget like just where you are, have you already staged something or committed something or not? If you forget if you did the add step, git status is a great one to do. So for example, if I do git add, and then now I do git status again, you can see, all right, changes to be committed. Here it says changes not staged for commit, but the second time it's changes to be committed. So cool. If I do a git commit -m, more changes, and then I do a git status again, it changes and it says that your branch is ahead of origin master by 1 commit. Origin master basically means the version that is on GitHub. So that this branch, this local version is ahead by 1 commit. And then it says use git push to publish your local commits. If I do a git push, followed by a git status, you should see now the working tree is clean. If I even want to double check that, if I refresh this one more time, now it registers my more changes from 35 seconds ago. So that's always good to know. If you're having trouble pushing, and if it's for a lab, most likely it's that you probably forgot to fork it. And how you can double check that is with viewing your remotes. So on this lab, if I do git remote -v, did I put a space? Yeah, -v. You can see that, let me make this a bit bigger. You can see that there are 2 URLs that pop up. A URL that I fetch from, like a URL where I can get changes from, and a URL that I push to. And so far, you see the communication is only happening between my local version and my remote version. So this makes sense. If you're having trouble pushing, do check that your remotes are the right remotes. So yeah, git remote -v, I put a note here to check that you're pulling and pushing to the right places. Cool. If your remote is incorrect, there are ways to change it. Honestly, you can really just Google, how do I change the remote URL? Probably if it's not working, it probably says like the Learn Co curriculum version. So all you have to do then is update the remote URL to be your own URL. And if you Google, if you're having issues with that, let me know. But you can pretty much Google and figure it out as well. All right. Any questions on this process before I move on to the next thing?
One question.
Yeah.
The environment section, the one that's in the parentheses,
Yes.
Are we always supposed to be in, can we be in base, or does it have to be in that learn-env kernel?
That's a great time for me to segue to environments. So environments for this course, honestly, I would say they're optional. For those of you who have managed to set it up, great. If you are working in the Learn environment, so instead mine always says base because I don't work with the Learn environment. If yours says Learn environment, great, that's fine, don't worry about it. The only problem if you're working with base is you might have to always manually install new packages that we're working with. So maybe you don't have a problem now in phase 1, but in the future, you just have to remember to manually install every new package that we work with. That's the only thing. So if you choose not to work in the Learn environment, and again, the difference and what a Learn environment does is it's using exact versions of packages that definitely don't have any dependency errors. So dependency errors, basically, let's say we have, so tomorrow we're going to talk about NumPy and pandas. These are two independent libraries. Of course, they have a bunch of things that overlap, but they're what's the word? They're managed by different people. So let's say pandas comes out with an update that maybe just changes the way a certain function works. And NumPy uses this one function. And if NumPy doesn't update itself to work with this new function, you have a dependency error. And so all the versions within the the Learn environment don't have dependency errors. And that's something that was checked by our curriculum team. So if you want to work in that, cool. If you work in your base environment, which, as you download things as and when we get to them, they will be the latest version. So that is one pro. I guess the con then is some of the versions that are in our curriculum are like a couple versions back. Not going to be big differences, and it's not a big deal at all. But those are the main differences. Any clarification on anything that I just mentioned? Cool. All right. So
sorry.
yes.
When you did the git add, what did you say the space dot meant?
Oh, the space dot meant everything. So let's say if you change multiple files, the space dot just stages all the changes across all your files.
Okay, thanks.
You're welcome. Yeah, sometimes you don't want to stage everything. So maybe you're like done with one file, but another file that you're still working on, you might just want to stage that one file. Cool. So how we work with virtual environments, that's really the only time we work with virtual environments in this curriculum. When we get to like much later, like closer to your final projects, one example of something where you might use a virtual environment is you might decide to host your project on a website, which I think will be super cool, but we won't talk about that too much right now. But let's say in your project, you use packages ABC, all of them version 2. If you're using packages ABC, all of them version 2, when you're taking your website, and think of your project as like a package, package is a overlapping word. So let's just say like you have your your project as a folder. How web hosting your things on the web works is you have to take your folder and upload it somewhere and then teach and basically connect it to some web server so your web server knows how to work with your project. You need to have a virtual environment then, because a virtual environment is able to keep track of the versions of packages that your project uses, so it can communicate with a web server. Okay, for this person's project, we need to make sure that these packages are all in version 2. Again, not something that we're going to work a lot with right now. Just similar to what I was saying yesterday, it's good for just making sure that your project will always be able to run successfully. even though like, again, like let's say like 3 years in the future, all the packages update, you want to run your old project, you don't have to go in and update the syntax of all your code before you can get it to work. Having a virtual environment with all of the package versions, there's a way to like run packages in a certain way, in a certain version, and we'll talk about that much later. That just makes sure that your code has a way to always run. Sweet. I felt like that was a lot of spiel, but any other questions about that before we move on to working with our study group repo? All right, perfect. Okay, so let me make this a little smaller again, just on this side. So we'll talk about this later. Next, we're going to talk about our study group repo. So this is our study group repo. Usually like once or twice a week, I'll just put all of our notes for the week in there. So it's up to you to just, download the notes so that you can have them. Honestly, not every student follows every notebook during these sessions. Sometimes it's hard to multitask. I totally understand. It's hard to multitask, like coding it at the same time as watching me go through it. So I feel like most students maybe pull down these notes like every week or so. So no pressure to do this every single study group. But basically what I'm going to do is, as the weeks go, I'm going to just keep populating these with updated notebooks. So our curriculum is always changing. So I'm always making little changes to notebooks, which is why they're not already up here. But basically, I want to show you all how to work with this. I actually do have instructions here, so feel free to follow these instructions, but I'm going to go through the steps as well. So one thing that's important that you do, the first thing that you do is make sure that you fork this repo. And I actually see that some of you have done this already. Great job. So some of you have already forked this repo. Great. This just makes sure that you have your own version. If you want to save changes that you've made to these notes, maybe you're like taking notes on something, maybe you're adding comments to some code that weren't on my version, they will live on your forked copies, which is good. The additional thing that you have to do is you have to add my version as the upstream. So the upstream, what that means is, and actually let me pull up this diagram now. This diagram is kind of similar to the last one that we saw, but slightly different because the last one that we saw doesn't have a box here. So this diagram with more arrows, and I do see it's kind of intimidating right now, shows all of the information flows. So what we've talked about, you're going to first fork this repo over to have your own version. Next, you're going to clone it. And you have to somehow establish that when you're taking down new information, you need to take it down from my version. Whereas if you're pushing things up, you want to push it up to your version. So that's why it's a little bit more complicated, because every week I'm going to be updating things from my local repo onto my remote version. And you have to be able to establish that, okay, new changes I want to get from Ish's version, but my own changes I want to push to my own version. So that's what this add remote does. Git remote add upstream. This just makes sure that it has my name in there. You can copy and paste. This line should work. So once this upstream is added, if you're making any changes to your own notes and you want to save it to GitHub, you just do the same add commit push steps. So that's pretty much the fork, clone, set the remote. If you set the remote, it doesn't really make any changes. It just tells Git that all your future changes are going to come from my version. So whenever you want to get updated notes, I would say always do a Git status to make sure that you don't have any unsaved changes. So do a Git status to make sure everything is up to date. If not, I would add commit push as well, because if you have local changes that haven't been pushed up, and if you're trying to merge my changes, you might run into conflicts. So very important that you do that. If you run into any conflicts, pretty much they will ask you to do add commit push first anyways, so that shouldn't be a problem. Then similar to how, when you are trying to push information, there's 3 steps to do that. There are 2 steps to get my information. So first, you're doing a fetch upstream. So fetch upstream just sort of tells Git that, hey, there are changes from Ish's repo that we want to have on our local repo. after you tell it that there are changes, you got to confirm that you want them, and you do the git merge upstream main. So upstream, when you set this as the remote, my remote is actually called an upstream. And then what this main actually just refers to the name of this branch. So yeah, it just is pulling it from the main branch. And then with a merge, it kind of counts as a commit as well. So you have to give it a commit message. So don't forget the commit message. If not, you'll get thrown an error and they will ask you to put a commit message. And then you can push the new notes to your remote repo with a git push. So in terms of the information flows, how that works, we forked, cloned, and every time I have new notes, you're going to do these two git fetch and git merge steps to pull down my new changes. You can work on them first. You can push them up first if you'd like, but you should always be add committing and pushing to your own version. So this is how you're going to get your notes from my notes, but then with this additional step, you can actually have your own information in your notes. So I highly recommend that you get this set up. If anything, at least set up the cloning and the remote add upstream part, because I mean, the only notebook that I have right now is the one that we went through yesterday. But tomorrow I'll be adding a notebook for topic 3. And I think I might add, I think I will also add the notebooks for topics 4 and 5 as well. So look out for those. I will send a message in the Slack whenever there are new notebooks to be pulled down. So it's up to you to make to just get them. If you run into any issues with this, just feel free to let me know. Maybe you Slack the channel, because usually if you have an error, everyone might have the same error. And sometimes it's also my fault. So if you're running into anything, feel free to just let me know. But cool. So I know that in your lessons for the Git section, they do talk about a couple other things that we haven't talked about today. I do want to save those for when we get into the project. I do think it's easiest to understand Git when you have something to do with it that's actually like very similar to a real life process. So we will save that for when we get to the project. And when we get to the project, I will actually walk you all through setting up your own project repository, setting up collaboration, because I will be pairing you up to do this first project. So I'll be setting up, I'll be showing you how to set up, collaborating with somebody, and also some processes and workflows to take note of. I think in the notes, I think in the curriculum, we talk about working with like branches and stuff like that. That will be things that we will be talking about. So let's see. Yeah, well, merging is something we'll be doing. Branches will be something that we'll be doing. So yeah. Any questions about anything that I've mentioned so far? Sweet. I will say Git is a very like murky, intimidating thing, especially I think for a lot of people, myself included, is that the fact that it's working through terminal can be very intimidating. I will say that like Git is probably the part of the course that took me the longest to get used to. So I would say when you're running into issues with Git, try and read as best as you can what's going on, because sometimes that does tell you what to do. And also Git is something that, is necessary evil. At most companies, they do use Git to update like whatever projects that they're working on. So it is a necessary evil. Get used to Googling for your answers. So if you're running into anything that you really don't think should be happening, you can always let me know. All right, wow, it got done a little bit early today. Any final questions before we close out?
Yeah, so I was running it on my own computer, and it said the requested URL returned error 400.
Okay. What line were you typing in to get that error?
I was just cloning it.
Okay, cloning my study group notes. Okay, so make sure that when you're cloning, it's this HTTPS version. And also that is your forked copy. So make sure that you, yeah. So make sure it's this URL, and it should be okay. Cool. I see that 4 people have already forked this over. Great job. Yeah, if anyone has any issues with this, let me know.
I have a question.
Yeah.
So this is about virtual environments. Is
Yeah.
there a reason that you would upload, like, do you put your virtual environment settings on GitHub? So it's an environment that's you have on your computer, and so you're pulling something down.
Cool. Yeah.
Somebody else might also need to use that environment.
Yeah, absolutely. Let me see if there's a version that I can show. So I have one project that I used a virtual environment for, and the way that you would show that is through something called a requirements.txt. And so when we were actually creating our virtual environment, we used something similar to like, it was like a windows.yaml file, YML file, actually has the same format as this. If you were to go and look into that file, it looks just like this with a bunch more libraries. So this is how you would tell people, this is what's in the virtual environment. If you want to recreate this environment to run my project on your computer, there is a way, and the way is basically to run like an install through this requirements.txt. Awesome. Yeah, that's a good question. Yeah, and usually you can actually create a requirements.txt based on what your project uses, and the reason for a virtual environment, why you want to set up a virtual environment first is, imagine on your base environment, you probably have like a bunch of packages that you aren't using in a single project. So my base environment, I know, has like pretty much every single package, but any one project is maybe going to use like no more than 30 different packages. So a virtual environment basically allows you to select which ones you want to use. And then actually you can automatically create this file based on your virtual environment.
Doesn't the Python virtual environment package do that automatically?
Kind of, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, it does. But if you want to like pick and choose for a specific project, especially if you're like importing things across different files, you usually want to like manually pick and choose which ones you want to use. And when we get like closer to finishing like big projects, I'll talk about how to do that. Not to worry. Yeah, this is an example of me with really bad commit messages. If you see, like, I think this one, I was just very, very, let's see. This is the one that, because I actually created this as an app, but if you look at like my commits, it was just me being very, very frustrated with everything like this. So please don't do that. I also accidentally, like, I put this on my resume and people were like, a recruiter saw this and was like, were you very frustrated working on this project in 2019? So yeah, be careful about that because people apparently do look at these. I thought that no one would look at these, but they do.
When are we going to start working on the first project? What's like the timeline for that?
Yeah, so let me talk about that. So usually one phase is 3 weeks of material, 1 week of project. I'm trying this new thing out where I'm introducing the project even earlier so that you have just more time to work on it. So the project is actually, and I'll talk about due dates in more detail when we go over the project, but I'm going to introduce the project at the beginning of week 3. So this is week 3. I'm going to introduce the project on June 1st. You'll actually see here another event, phase 1 project presentations. This is actually my other cohort that is working on their projects right now. They're presenting their projects this evening. They are a part-time cohort, so their classes are in the evening. So I will remind you all of that so that you can see what, perfect timing really, to see what like the project results could look like. But the project is officially due, not officially due, but you will be presenting your projects the Friday after. So on June 11th, you will be presenting your project. So you have like a little under 2 weeks to work on it, which I think is better because usually it's only 1 full week. But I think in introducing it earlier, and you'll see why based on like the content of the rest of the phase, I think you'll be able to start working on it then. So usually you have a week to work on projects, but this time I'm like giving you like a little bit over a week. And I think that that'll be beneficial. So yeah, introducing the project on the 1st, due on the 11th. And so that way, usually project due dates I put on like a Monday so people have the extra weekend to work on it, but I want you all to have that weekend not worrying about the project so much. In terms of official due dates, something I talked about during orientation, but I'll talk about again when we get to the project, is after you present the project, the 2 weeks after that, you will schedule a project review with me. That's the time where I look over your code, and you'll explain your thought processes, you'll explain why you did what you did. So that will happen anytime in the 2 weeks following. So you will schedule a project review of the phase 1 project during the first 2 weeks of phase 2. There's going to be a little bit of overlap. And I will say that the project should be due the day before you schedule your review. So the official due date where you have to like submit everything is just the day before you schedule your review with me. So even though you have to present something on the 11th, you can still continue working on it until you have your review anytime between, I guess, the 14th to the 25th. So there's a good amount of time there. But usually people like to get the project over with as soon as possible so that you can actually focus more on like the next phase's material. So that's kind of what timeline looks like.
And the first project is collaborative?
It is going to be collaborative, yes. So my plan is to make the first 2 projects paired projects. Okay. And I will be taking into account your time zone in pairing you up as well.
Okay, great. Thank you.
You're welcome. Any other questions? Cool. In preparation for tomorrow, if anyone's noticed, tomorrow's session will go a little bit longer. We're going to do our regular study group followed by a weekly pulse check. So this weekly pulse check kind of complements the stand-ups that we do at the beginning of the week. So this is at the end of the week. Weekly pulse check. We're all going to meet on Zoom. Well, it's going to be right after study group, so you all will be here anyways. And we'll just talk about what we did over the week. So yeah, just in case anyone's wondering what that is, that's something that we do weekly. They're just touch base. Also a good time to just talk to each other. I feel like in this program, especially online, we don't have a lot of opportunity to just like chat with each other. So that is what that time is there for. Sweet. Anything else?
Question for text editors for Jupyter Notebook. Should we just always be using that, or is there a way to integrate it into like Visual Studio Code or something else?
That's a good question. So in Jupyter Notebook has its own like very lame text editor. So if you just take a look at Jupyter Notebook, and this is like if you don't want to download any additional software. So I think like most of you shouldn't have a problem with that. If you just do new text file, and a text editor is for us to write Python files. So let's just say test.py. This automatically becomes a Python file that you can like define functions. And yeah, that works. So you can use this as a text editor, but not that many functions. You can't like, I don't know, this is not much to do here. But in terms of text editors, Visual Studio Code, I haven't used this myself because I don't use Visual Studio Code, but Visual Studio Code, I think, has a way to open Jupyter Notebooks. And you can actually run a Jupyter Notebook within Visual Studio Code. I've seen like a couple students do this. I personally don't like it because I don't know, I don't like change. So I like to see the Jupyter. I just like to see it on Jupyter. But yeah, if you want to do that, you can. Yeah, I know that VS Code does have that functionality.
Should we start looking into using other text editors for like when it comes to project, or is that a couple weeks down the road when we figure out how?
For this first project, you don't have to worry about text editor.
Okay, so like we won't have to worry about coding something in a different editor and calling it from bash.
Yeah. Only for this first phase, we will only be working out of Jupyter Notebooks.
Okay.
Yeah. Jupyter Notebook is actually really useful when you realize that you can make multiple windows and just have snippets of code that run in all those windows individually. So it's actually really easy to organize your code for small projects in Jupyter Notebook. I think there's a lot of like functionality there that is available to you in other text editors, but it's just like really, really simple. You could just run each cell individually. So you can always debug code and stuff. So Justin, if you want to check out like a little more into like how Jupyter Notebook really runs, I think you might find it kind of fun to use.
Cool. Thanks, Dimitri. Taylor, you have something?
Yeah, you can also, I've been using the terminal, you can open up a terminal session in VS Code. And so that's how I've been doing it. And then you can do your file at the top and then do the terminal session at the bottom.
Ooh.
So
Okay, I was wondering because I was having a hard time getting Bash to open
I'll send a
VS
screenshot.
Code. I've been trying to figure out how to make that work. I'll have to look through it. I'm not a PC user. I've been on a Mac. My iMac is outdated and it's because it's from 2012 and my PC is, so I built a PC for gaming and that's what I'm using. And I have a MacBook Air and that's not going to work either. So
In the VS Code terminal session, you can switch between which shell you're using. So like if you're on a Mac, it's automatically ZSH.
I'll have to
then
add.
you can just
I'll have to
download
add.
the updated version of Bash and switch to
Okay.
that. It's like, you'll see it. I'll send a screenshot. It's like
Oh,
at the
I
top
see
of the
it, yeah.
terminal session on the right.
Got it. I see it. I see it on the terminal, a little pull down window that says PowerShell 1, and you can add back. Okay. Yep.
Awesome.
Got it.
Thanks, Taylor. Yeah, I would say don't worry too much about text editors now, especially like if this stuff is still a little overwhelming. We will get to text editors. I'm going to introduce it for phase 2, but for now, phase 1 definitely we do not need to use any text editor stuff at all. But cool. Another thing that might be of interest, there's this other thing called Jupyter Lab, which is basically like a different way of using Jupyter notebooks. I personally don't use it, but I know some instructors actually really do like to use, what did I just do? Oh, Jupyter Lab. If you take a look at what it looks like, it basically like it's like Jupyter as its own thing, and then you can have a bunch of like notebook tabs open. So if you know you're going to be working out of like multiple notebooks, you might consider Jupyter Lab, but I actually don't use it, so I can't really explain how it works in much detail. I see a question here. If a repo gets updated, do we clone the repo again, or is there code that clones the updates to the repo? Oh, really great question. So I should actually put that in the slides here. If you want to get changes from your own, so let's say you're working on 2 computers and you're switching from computer 1 to computer 2. You worked on computer 1 first. And if you already had it cloned on computer 2 and you just want to get updates, to do that, it is git pull. So as long as it's your own work, it's git pull. Git pull gets updates down from your own version. Let me just do this formatting in a little bit. That's a good question I forgot to mention. Nice. Anything else while I format this? There we go. So you can access this slideshow. You have view access if you go into your, wow. I usually have like an external monitor, but I don't currently. So yeah, you can access this slideshow in the phase 1 folder of the Flatiron resources here. So if you want to just look at this diagram again, it's here for you. Cool. Final call for questions before we close out. All right, well, I will say, try and see whether you can like get this repo working. And when I add new notes for tomorrow, I'll have you all test to see if you can successfully do that. If anyone runs into issues, please let me know. But if there's nothing else for today, I will see you all tomorrow. Have a good rest of your day, everybody. Bye.
Thank you, you too.
Bye.